Good morning, students. This is a history class. India and Contemporary World Part 2, History Class 10. This year in history, we will study how nation states were created all over the world, as well as how nationalism emerged in India. We live in a world where the existence of nations is taken for granted. And we think of countries as unified entities, each with a demarcated international boundary, a defined territory, a national language, and a central government. How did this kind of modern nation states come into being? And how did people begin to see themselves as belonging to a nation? And the nationalism was shaped by the experiences of colonialism and the anti colonial or imperialist movement. For example, in India, nationalism emerged or expanded with the anti imperialist movement. But remember, the nationalist movements in these countries to conforms that these were also widely different. And to understand how nationalism spreads, we need to know not only what the leaders said, but also how their words were understood and interpreted by people. Nationalism in India. As we know, there were many revolts initiated by the tribals and the peasants. And after 1857 revolt, there was a drastic change in the understanding of the people that the imperial countries exploiting our resources and the people's understanding of who they were and what they define their identity and a sense of belonging has been changed. Now they started using new symbols and icons, new songs and ideas that forged new links and redefined the boundaries of communities. And we will study how this consciousness emerged in India, how the nationalism emerged or expanded. In India, the growth of modern nationalism is intimately connected to an anti colonial movement. And people began discovering their unity in the process of their struggle with colonialism. But each class and group felt the effects of colonialism differently, and their experiences were varied, and their notions of freedom were not always same. And with the coming of Gandhiji into the mainstream of freedom struggle, a real sense of freedom struggle or nationalism started emerging in India, that is after 1915. Here in this chapter, we will go through the impact of First World War, the Khilafat and non-cooperation movement that has started from 1919 onwards, and the different strands with the movement, and the civil disobedience movement, which is famously known as the Dandi March, and what are the strategies adopted by the leaders to create a sense of collective belonging. What is meant by nationalism? There are many definitions to nationalism. A simple definition is nationalism is loyalty and devotion to a nation, that we used to say proud to be an Indian. In this chapter, we will pick up the story from the 1920s and the study of the non cooperation movement and the civil disobedience movement. And also, we will learn that how different social groups participated in the movement and how the sense of collective belonging was created by the leaders. First World War, which has started from 1914 and ended in 1918, was India the member of First World War? Yes, indirectly India involved in the First World War because India was the colony of Britain at that time, and Britain was one of the main member in the First World War. So, but we leaders or soldiers were reluctant to participate in the First World War. But the British promised that once war gets over, we will be rewarded a dominion status. Based on this promise, the leaders agreed to send Indian soldiers to fight for the British abroad. These are some of the pictures how the Indian soldiers were practiced or trained for the First World War. The soldiers were taken through ships to abroad, and ultimately in the World War, British Empire or Allied powers got victory, but they forgot the promise they assured when the war was started. What were the effects of First World War? As you know, if a country fight in a war, there is a need of huge expenditure. When the First World War has started, the war led to a huge increase in the defense expenditure. In order to meet this expenditure, the British government in India increased the taxes. The custom duties were raised and income taxes were introduced to raise the extra revenue. And also at this time, the prices of items increased during the war years. And during these war years, the prices doubled between 1913 and 1918. Of course, the common people are worst hit, and they were the worst sufferers because of the price rise. Apart from this, the British introduced a new role, that is forced recruitment. The people of the rural area were forced to join in the army to expand the British army to fight for the First World War. Another impact was this crop failure in many parts of India that resulted in acute shortage of food. And another reason, the spread of influenza epidemic that aggravated the problem. And according to the 1921 census, about 12 to 13 million people died because of famines and epidemic. Even amidst this sufferings, people hope that once these problems will get over, a good future will come. But instead of reward, the British government gave the punishment to Indians. This is the Gandhian era. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, born in October 2, 1869 at Porbandar in Gujarat. After his basic education, he went to London for higher studies to study law. And after completing the study of law, he went to South Africa for practice. It was South Africa made Gandhiji as a popular leader. He fought against the racial discrimination, apartheid that which existed in South Africa at that time. He started the Satyagraha movement against the racial discrimination. In January 1915, Gandhiji returned to India from South Africa and gave the idea of Satyagraha that emphasized the protest based on truth and nonviolence. What is the idea of Satyagraha? Satyagraha literally means holding on to truth or truth force. And as per Gandhiji, this is a non-violent struggle which he introduced in India, and it pursues the opponent to understand the truth. And Gandhiji better knew that India or Indians are weak. So he used Satyagraha as a pure soul force. This is a weapon of the weak. And Satyagraha is not a physical force, and it's a passive resistance that it is a weapon of the weak. And he says if the cause was true, if the fight was against injustice, then physical force was not necessary to fight the oppressor. In India, Gandhiji started the Satyagraha movements. The first was Champaran movement, then Keda and mill workers movement. The Champaran movement was started in 1916, and it was a movement of workers of in indigo plantation of Champaran district in Bihar, and it was against the oppressive plantation system. And the second movement initiated by Gandhiji was the Keda movement of 1917. Due to the crops failure and plague epidemic, the farmers could not pay the revenue. So they approached Gandhiji and demanded for a support for their cause. So they started a movement under Gandhiji's leadership with the demand for a reduction of land revenue. And the third movement initiated by Gandhiji was Ahmedabad cotton mill workers movement. The low wages and the poor working condition forced the mill workers of Ahmedabad to start a movement under Gandhiji's leadership in 1918. And these were the first satyagraha movements initiated by Gandhiji after returning from South Africa to India or after 1915. I give some of the homeworks to do. If possible, watch the movie on Gandhi directed by Richard Attenborough and also explore more on this topic in Google or YouTube classes and or download the textbook. At least take this chapter 3 and try to read. Thank you.